Welcome to Straight Shooting News. I'm your host, man, Deanna Red. The show. This is part 3 of Arrest by Algorithm, Megadata. The new big oil is artificial intelligence and tyranny. So, part 1, we covered the obvious, you've seen on the mainstream news that's going on. Part 2, we covered deceptions from the conference that was done in September 2020 before the election on China and its artificial intelligence. And now we're going to show you, we're going to have to go back in time with the dark journalist, DJ, who does an excellent job with Mr. Farrell and his cousin, who's also a historian. And they're going to go into the Colasaro affair. And, well, there's going to be a lot of strange twists in there. You're going to hear things about that should raise questions, right? Like, is William Barr, the former AG under Trump, who was known as the closer, was he compromised? Is everybody in governments worldwide compromised? Is everything compromised when it comes to AI? No? You're going to hear about Promise software, Brainstorm, the octopus, CIA murder. Whoever controls the back door, through the back door, has control the governments and agencies. So let's begin with the starting now, with the starting segment of this.
This is X Series episode 133. It deals with the Danny Casolaro Inslaw mystery, which is a cold case that goes all the way back to 1991. And when we're looking at that, it's quite fascinating because, what we have is a situation where so many trails were presented and then lost through time. And one of the major trails we were able to pick up through a conversation with the cousin of somebody who's a regular on this program, Dr. Joseph Farrell, and his cousin Marty Farrell came on the show, and we did a very interesting episode. It's out there now. That is Casolaro Mystery, and it's all about his 2 meetings, which were chance encounters in Virginia just before Casolaro passed away, and some of the things that Casolaro was doing. Now, what I found out after going through the testimony of Marty about what he heard from Casolaro, which again were just glimpses of things that Casolaro was working on, is that Casolaro had this habit, especially the more he researched this stuff, of just sharing large amounts of information with people that he would meet, and who would, because I think he wanted to talk to people about this and spread some of the knowledge. And he always had this great big file folder with him, which contained all the information around the octopus. He never felt good leaving that anywhere. And that all disappeared, of course, when he was found dead in his West Virginia hotel room. One of the things that strikes me as interesting about all this is that, Casolaro had been at this for a while, and one of the things that's left off in people in their rush to say, well, it was so-and-so controlling the Promise software. I've heard everything from the Masons to Israel to the Vatican. It's very tricky. We have to be very careful about that software and who got the back door into it. And we may have gotten an opening in this episode that we did with Marty, because it concerned a few things that kept coming up about a programmer named Barry Cumnick and some of the modifications he made to Promise to make it into something called Brainstorm, which is very much like how AI operates today. And this may explain a great deal of how we got converted into this kind of bizarro system, as the foundation was laid there in the 1980s. And there were all these court cases over the software. A number of deaths attributed to people who were researching it, including Casolaro, of course, who died in Martinsburg, Virginia, in August of 1991. And the official verdict was suicide. But anyone who knew Casolaro knew that he was warning, I'm not the kind of person who would commit suicide. And by the way, a lot of people are giving me threats. Given the level that he was operating on, you can see a number of people being threatened by his information. But one of his key sources was this genius computer engineer named Michael Riconosciuto, and Riconosciuto hooked him up with a number of sources. And there's a big piece that's been overlooked in this case. I'm not even sure how it got overlooked. With this Marty Farrell realization that we were getting in his conversation when he was recalling the anecdotes about meeting Casolaro, is that Marty Farrell said that it seemed to him that Danny Casolaro was very confused as to why the Justice Department was as upset and freaking out to the level that they were in driving this case to the brink. And that suggests, on a research angle, that there was something else that was involved. This is what Casolaro was getting at, which is something else was involved with the software before it hit the Justice Department. And the idea is somebody was watching the watchers. And whoever that person is, we're looking at this idea that there may be an unseen actor who's blackmailing people on all sides of this equation. So as much as we've attributed the, backdoor action to Israel or Mossad or the CIA or the NSA, whatever that happens to be, certainly the government, through the Reagan administration, inserted their version of a backdoor, but apparently someone else got to it first, and this is the danger that's involved with this whole case. And so I think bringing that aspect forward is going to give us a whole new discovery line of research on this. And journalists, today I have a special episode and interview for you on new revelations about the Inslaw Promise Software cold case scandal. The Inslaw affair, as it's referred to, involved efforts by the United States government to conduct covert surveillance of countries and targeted individuals by means of the United States government to conduct covert surveillance of countries and targeted individuals by means of the advanced Promise software. Journalist Danny Casolaro, who deeply researched the case, died under mysterious circumstances when he was about to reveal his bombshell findings on the trail of global government corruption that he called the octopus. Many of his informants ended up dead or missing as well. The compelling revelations by someone who had two chance encounters with Casolaro at events in Virginia shortly before his death open up a new trail of discovery. During these encounters, Casolaro indicated something was wrong with the intense reaction by the U.S. Justice Department in the Inslaw affair case. These revelations dovetail with information Dr. Joseph Farrell came across that strongly suggests someone had already built a backdoor into the Promise software before it was stolen by the Justice Department and seeded throughout the financial, legal, and national security apparatus of allies and enemies across the globe, meaning that some other group, an unseen actor, has been conducting a worldwide blackmail campaign. The source for today's Casolaro revelations regarding his meeting with the doomed reporter is Marty Farrell, Dr. Farrell's cousin. We'll meet Marty today, and he'll put on the record for the first time the fascinating comments Casolaro made in their brief encounters. We'll go deep with Dr. Farrell on the blockbuster break in the 30-year-old Promise software case that may have staggering implications for what the deep state is attempting for global control. Marty,
Yep. Well, how was that for a start? Did it catch your attention? It caught mine when I first saw the show. A case dating back to 1991. A foundation was set for all this AI and algorithms back in the 1980s. I believe the former head of the CIA, George Bush, was vice president then, and Reagan could have been fading a bit. Promise and brainstorm. Sort of like the birth, as he put it, to the AI and algorithm technology today. So what he's going to be talking about is called the Inslaw affair. It's the Inslaw case. And a lot of it's known as the octopus because it's got so many tentacles. What they created was algorithms and artificial intelligence with so many tentacles. And it's Casolaro who's digging into it they said he was dead by suicide. Well, you'll hear more about his attitude in the next interview. So what happens was his backdoors going on backdoors. You'll hear how that came about and how it took people by surprise. So that means someone was watching the watches, because this all was designed to spy on us. They'll tell you it was out to spy on other governments. They did use it on other governments. But in the end, it's us. So we have some backdoor blackmail. There's a plan that went out to blackmail everybody and get global control. What were they just talking about? What China's plan is? When you watch this, you'll see why you need to watch segment 2 too, because it's all falling in place. So who controls the backdoor to the backdoor? All right, we're going to start again and get ready to go down into this deep rabbit hole, into this conspiracy. It's not a theory. It's a conspiracy. Go ahead, roll that.
It's great to have you here. I'm going to have you introduce yourself to our viewers now, just to give us an idea. We know that you're Dr. Farrell's cousin. Is there anything else you want to put on the record in your bio?
Well, I've had multiple jobs in my career.
Well, don't forget to throw in your dad's job.
Oh yeah, my dad's job of 25 plus years was Smithsonian Institution in the Red Castle building, right off of Jefferson Davis Highway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it kind of led me down some rabbit holes very early in my age. Needless to say, he had a lot to do with my inquisitive mind, I think, and put a lot of questions in my life early.
Yeah.
Only in his connection was with the International Educational Agency or something like that, very early in his career.
Yep.
It's so interesting. So many mysteries around the Smithsonian.
Been out there, and Uncle Bob, I remember he had just started working in the Red Castle, and I remember him taking us into that building through these weird doors that nobody ever used. He was opening his, keys and everything. So we got to see some passageways in the Smithsonian that most people don't get to see.
Somewhere along the line, Marty, you got to meet. You had a chance encounter at first with the journalist Danny Casolaro of Octopus fame and all the interesting, fascinating things that he brought forward about Promise Software and other pieces of the puzzle there around the deep state. How did you meet him?
Well, it was at a ski chalet sale in Arlington, Virginia. Ski Chalet puts on these promotions every single year, and they're usually pretty big shindigs. Just happened to be in the sale. He was there, walking through the crowd and talking to people because, he was an outgoing kind of guy. That was his kind of demeanor. And it just so happens on the ski wall where I was selling skis, he was talking to somebody about BCCI.
Oh, wow.
My ear went like that because I was like, I didn't really know about that banking institution back then, but I had heard rumors about it, and it caught my interest, especially since I was looking into Western goals and stuff like that back there in that time. Somebody said something about going to get some beers. We'll tell you that he had something with him, which is this brown accordion file.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, and it had manila envelopes in it with names and dates and addresses, all kinds.
Whoa.
He had him with him.
Fascinating.
He had him with him.
Look inside that thing?
No, I didn't get to see, he delegated out a couple of files and I didn't get to see any of the stuff, but,
Right.
and like I said, it was like a 30-minute dinner,
Yeah.
quick. He was more interested in looking at stuff for himself, it looked like, than paying attention to me.
Mhm.
But I was interested in him. He kept saying that something isn't right with this ordeal that I'm going at, I'm looking at. And I kept asking him, what is it? What's this ordeal? And, he said, promise.
Holy
I
cow.
remember promise.
Mhm.
Mm.
And he said, prosecutors, management information systems.
Mhm.
And that stuck in my mind.
Mhm.
And he goes, it's not making sense that, this is such a big deal for the DOJ. That was the subsequent meeting in when we had beers. The first meeting was 1989.
Okay.
And he didn't have very much then, just had a bunch of, conglomeration of stuff. And it didn't look like he was really interested in talking to me. He's more interested in drinking his beers and going through the stuff. And then the next year in 1990 is when we sat down and had beers and we kind of discussed a lot of the stuff.
At that second meeting, and he's saying that something is not adding up, but he was genuinely mystified.
Yes.
Marty, if you had to go and think of this time-wise, you're saying 89, 90, would you say it was the fall of 89, the summer of 89?
I know exactly the month or the 2 months, August, September.
Okay.
Because that's when Ski Chalet used to have their sales.
The case with him, he's moving around files, and he's talking a little bit about something doesn't add up with what I'm working on, and he mentions promise. How do you get to a second meeting? What happens? What leads you to meet him the second time?
Before we exited that restaurant, I said, listen, my friend, I need to speak with you again. We need to talk again because I am very interested in what you're pulling down, and we need to speak. And I said, I don't care when, where, or when we need to speak.
About a second time, you're reconnecting, and what's the conversation like?
Serious.
Yeah.
Dead serious. I mean, he's wandered into a place that he doesn't know where it's going to lead other than, well, he did say, I'm not the kind of guy that will ever kill himself.
Holy
He did say
cow.
that to me.
Oh boy.
How long did you guys talk?
25 minutes again, 25, 30. He, you know what I recognize, he didn't really talk too much, too long with anybody. It was, short interactions, at least with me. That's what it was. And he didn't really know me that well, other than I had same interests as him.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And we were diving down similar rabbit holes at that time.
Things. He was
Similar rabbit holes. Now think about this. This is about a case dating back to 1991. Marty happens to run into him selling skis. And over here, we talk about banking institutions. That caught his attention. And then he starts talking about information systems. And he wasn't sure why the DOJ was so concerned. Then he comes up with something like, he's not the type of guy that's going to kill himself. Yeah, I can see how he would catch this guy's attention. But let's get ready and maybe go a little deeper into this rabbit hole that they seem to have something in common about in the Inslaw case. Roll it.
probably relieved to be talking to someone who knew
Who was
something.
interested.
Yeah.
That's where it kind of got serious. The second round was that he was amazed what I knew about, a lot of that stuff. And it was only on my own behalf that I knew it. Is that he couldn't figure out why DOJ was so concerned that this disappeared. They were using this software long before
Right.
all of this took place. You
Holy
know,
cow.
all these agencies were using this software. IRS, FBI, DOJ, all of them. Why would they, other than nefarious purposes?
Yep. The Inslaw case. This is interesting because this is actually up. It was out there. The House Judiciary Committee was actually informed about it. And this thing called the octopus. Some of the names, former Nixon Attorney General.
And mention it on the record.
Yeah.
Back in the early 1990s, I read a book, a fictional novel, and I don't remember the author's name. Part of the book was about the Promise software. And this is where the story, when you mentioned that you had met Casolaro and that he was disturbed about something regarding the Promise story that he couldn't figure out, it rang the alarm bell, because this book maintained that a programmer, and this is where it gets really weird, and I'm sure Daniel's going to leap in here, a programmer who had been working for Inslaw by the name of Barry Cumnick had supposedly programmed a backdoor into the Promise software before it ever left Inslaw. And
The backdoor. Here you go.
a programmer who had been working for Inslaw by the name of Barry Cumnick had supposedly programmed a backdoor into the Promise software before it ever left Inslaw and was stolen by the Justice Department. So, in other words, after the software was stolen and then allegedly farmed around by the DOJ to, Wackenhut and the CIA and all the stuff that Danny uncovered and was uncovering right about the time he met you, about, them adding backdoors to the software. This book, this fictional book, is maintaining that a backdoor had been added unbeknownst to the owners of Inslaw before the software was even stolen. And I'll tell you, Marty, what really gets me. When I first mentioned that story, I think it was on George Ann Hughes in the Old Bite Show. I don't even remember where I first mentioned it. Lo and behold, out of the clear blue sky, I get an email from Bill Hamilton, the president of Inslaw.
Wow.
Yeah, asking me, what do I know about this? Where did you, and blah, 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 blah. And I told him, it was in this book. That's all I know. And at the time, I still had a copy of the book. And if I remember correctly, I gave him the title of this thing. But it really floored me that he took it seriously enough to email me about it.
So this kind of, Marty, was it your impression when you talked to Casolaro that he thought that somebody had got to this software and put a backdoor or interfered with it and changed it before the DOJ stole it? Did that come up at all?
Not directly. It didn't come up directly, but it was. He gave me the impression that something funky was going on beforehand.
Oh,
and here's another interesting thing, and I did not know. What is cryptic AG or crypto AG? What is that?
Okay, so let's pause and say this is a CIA NSA front company dealing with advanced steganography and spying. It's disbanded as of 2018. What did he say?
He mentioned that term?
No, this is something that I just came across. BDN, or as this involves BDN and a lot of the other intelligence agencies, because there was another guy at NSA who ended up gone, who worked at Vent Mill, Virginia.
Oh, holy cow.
Okay, and it was in January of 1991 that he showed up at National Airport in a car all beat up.
Right.
What just popped into my mind is that you may be talking about something having to do with blockchains and cryptocurrencies.
Hmm.
Well, that's
And
what
if
that's what this guy Standorf, Alan Standorf.
yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
So there may be, in other words, there may be backdoors and all that stuff that have not.
Apparently, he worked.
There's our dark pools and our algorithmic trading.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, let's unfold that. There's a lot there. This should wake some people up who are into this whole cryptocurrency thing. So basically, this started out with people with common interests, where just conspiracy theorists. And this is a chance discussion that's going to unwind into a little something more. You know, we're talking about here, this Inslaw case, it's real, you know, and the fact that all the agencies were using it, that's factual too. This is all the software that they were developing. But they are using it to believe that would help them to spy on each other. Is that how government works? They just spy on each other and trust themselves? That's the question I got. And the name that came up in the case too is former AG under President Richard Nixon. And he was involved somehow with all this. Octopus, like I told you earlier, Many Arms, and a book, a fictional novel about a programmer with a backdoor into a backdoor before it was put into use. There was $25 million paid for this software. And it was stolen by the DOJ and farmed out to the CIA and all these other agencies to use. And when Joseph Farrell said that he was on a show, which is basically what he does, he talks about all these different historic events and theories. The word got back to Bill Hamilton, who was the president of Inslaw, and he emailed him direct. That kind of puts a little perspective into what we're hearing here and how big this all was. Now, where he really caught Joseph Farrell's attention was he started talking about the backdoors and blockchain and the cryptocurrencies. He made a statement there because a lot of people pushing their cryptocurrencies. They think it's the way to get around a financial disaster that's, I think most of us can see could possibly happen. But now, as Joseph put it, an algorithm into dark trading. So unless you're in with this dark trading crowd, you better be careful with your money. So the other question we got is, so if all the systems from espionage to financials, are they all made vulnerable by the software? This is where technology can be used for the good or control and power. We've already had 2 episodes about control and power. With that, let's continue. Let's see what else they have to say.
Just want to, for the record, get that. You sat down. He mentions he's uneasy about Promise Software, and he wonders why the Justice Department is so hell-bent to cover it up or press this case or whatever it happens to be. Give me a little more of anything you remember just of being there, even if it seems insignificant.
He apparently made a bunch of copies with some guy, you know, and he didn't tell me who the guy was.
Mm-hmm.
But if I go back into stories, it's this guy Michael and Standorf.
Michael Riconosciuto?
Yeah, it's Standorf.
Oh, yeah.
that are making
This is very clear, and anybody out there who's listening and knows the Inslaw story knows why I'm going apoplectic here. Because what you're suggesting is that Casolaro had somehow made a connection or knew, or there was a connection directly between Michael Riconosciuto and Alan Standorf of the NSA.
something like that. That's the impression I got.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know who they were.
Right.
I didn't know who. He says, yeah, we just made a bunch of, copies. And I didn't, what am I supposed to think? When
Wait a minute. Copies of what? His file folder?
Yeah, folders.
Interesting.
I'm So in other words, Casolaro has this big vanilla folder
It's
with all these
what I saw was a dark brown accordion case.
accordion. Okay,
with
accordion
vanilla
folder.
files. That's all I saw. I don't know what he had by the time.
And you're implying that somebody that Casolaro was connected with, that he and Casolaro made copies of this accordion folder.
No, that was his personal file. They were just making copies of whatever these two guys were giving him.
Okay, I got you. Okay.
Yeah,
Right. So let's go back to that. He's saying we're making copies with Michael and this other guy. What else does he say about it?
He says, this stuff that's coming out of this is not making. This is where he's saying it's not making sense to him.
Uh-huh.
These files are pretty extensive. In other words, they have to do with he said highly classified information.
Right. Nervous at that point.
Oh, very nervous, very serious, completely different from the first time I met him. More so adamant about getting to the bottom of this thing.
I see.
Yeah.
He gives you a hint that he isn't going to commit suicide.
No. That never entered my mind.
What did he say to you about it, though?
I'm not the kind of person that will ever commit suicide.
But that's an interesting thing to just slip into a conversation. How did that come out? Like, were you talking? Mentioned something about copies. He's uneasy about the case.
I'm telling him, whatever you're into, you may be getting in over your head. This is if you're telling me this is how, and you're not, you're getting in over your head. Peter Wiedendix?
Peter Wiedendix?
Wiedendix, whatever the guy's name. Wiedendix.
Oh.
Wiedendix. Yeah.
What happened? What did he say about him?
Just he wasn't confident that the guy was on the up and up.
No, he was. Yeah.
Good reason. Yeah.
I got to get this straight in my head. So you're meeting with Casolaro. He just happens blithely to mention Michael Riconosciuto.
And you got to understand, I don't know this guy.
I understand.
Down a rabbit hole.
I got that. But anyway, he's mentioning Michael Riconosciuto, Alan Standorf, Peter Wiedendix, okay? And then, on top of this is where I'm confused.
Hey, cuz, He didn't mention Standor.
Oh, okay. Okay.
He didn't mention him. He mentioned
Okay.
Michael, but he didn't mention Standor.
Okay. He's mentioned Michael Riconosciuto, and that he and somebody else were making copies.
Mm-hmm.
The copies that he mentioned you had the impression that they were of the Promise software program, or were they copies of actual other classified files?
I think they're probably classified other files. Yeah.
Okay.
And they were communications.
Okay. If they were communications, were they using the Promise software to access those files and make the copies? You don't know.
No, I don't know. I don't know how they got them. He just said they were there. Boom, we made them. I could speculate, but his demeanor drastically changed from one year to the next. That's a certainty.
Yeah.
And he wasn't defeated by any stretch of the imagination. He was on to something. Couldn't figure it out, but was on to something. That was my impression.
Now, the last name you mentioned,
Okay. He was on to something. And he was sharing documents. Was he sharing classified documents and information? But it was someone who wasn't defeated. So this whole suicide thing doesn't seem to make sense. Seems to be a common thread. So he told me he got in over his head. And keep in mind, as you go forward with this, and they start connecting the dots for you, that Riconosciuto testified in front of the Judiciary Committee. So the software they're talking about is definitely something concerning these people. So when he says he doesn't understand, well, it's hard to believe he didn't understand if he had all these documents, but we can understand that this isn't just conspiracy theories. There is some kind of conspiracy inside the government going on here that you sure don't want the people to know about. All right, let's roll this and go a little deeper where they connect the dots.
that's a tricky name too, but he brought it up. You remembered something about it, and he didn't trust this person.
Right. He apparently had been going through something of this guy's testimony. He'd been going through it, and it wasn't adding up, and it didn't make sense to him. And I came back at him again.
Okay.
I came back at him again and said, listen, we must continue this. You seem very, very uptight this time. I want to see you again. We need to do this again, and it didn't happen.
Why is the Justice Department making such a big deal out of this software? That's the very first time I've ever heard this.
Yeah.
In connection with Castellaro and his investigation.
Yeah, that is really interesting. That he
Well-
himself is mystified at the reaction.
Well, that's what makes me think that there's something to this story, that there was a backdoor added before anybody else knew about it, and before anybody else had done so. If that's the case, if you're selling software, if you're the CIA and you've had Michael Riconosciuto and Wackenhut modify and add all these backdoors to the software that you then allow to be stolen in some cases by the Soviet Union, or you sell cheap to the West German intelligence service and so on, and then you discover that someone else besides you has a back door and it's out there and they've got access to all this stuff, then the Justice Department hits the panic button.
These are the indicators. If the Justice Department figures out after it's spread the software to these different countries intentionally and even allies, then it realizes, oh, somebody's watching us.
Right.
because there's already a backdoor inside of it.
Nice.
That is, that makes so much sense with what we're looking at. If you look at right after the fact, you go into 9/11, you go into the financial coup, and you go into this massive worldwide hacking going along, even to the arrest of Assange. You're looking at a whole field that they're trying to get their hands back on and put the genie back in the bottle.
In the bottle, right?
Well, you know who's an interesting player in all of these events?
Who?
William P. Barr.
Ooh.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
He's
Oh,
the
yeah.
guy that closed the case down on this
Yep.
thing.
Right.
yep, right. That's right.
Excellent point.
And he's the guy that's connected to the whole Mina business, and courtesy of Terry Reid in his book Compromised.
The New Covenant, cuz.
Yeah, the New Covenant. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Do you,
As our boy, someone wrote a political cartoon. If you take a close look at it, they've got a lot of things sticking out of that door that Billy Boy Barr and his bagpipes
his
are
phone?
blowing now. Let's unroll that a bit. Massive worldwide hacking. So here we go. I think Farrell put it all together with the different so-called conspiracy theories that when you start looking at stuff like this, they're not really conspiracies anymore. I mean, you've got him selling the software to take down the Soviet Union. Yeah, that happened. And you got software going in West Germany and our allies. It's just, there's just way too much there to just say, this is just all a theory and dismiss it. And then when you look at what's happened today, I mean, the way they bring up Bill Barr at the end, so it's apparent Bill Barr was compromised. He's been compromised for a long time. He covered up for Bush and the shootings up at Ruby Ridge when they just murdered the guy and his wife up there, set him up. It was entrapment. And actually killed his wife while he was holding the baby in his arms. That was Billy Boy Barr, and that was the concern that a lot of people were bringing up. So I got some questions of my own. I mean, was Trump asking questions about some of these theories? I mean, is that why Billy Barr has been throwing Trump under the bus? It's getting way too close to too many things, including 9/11, which Trump takes personally because he was in New York. You even have the photos of him over there marching down to the building. So Assange, remember now, Assange was being held in Great Britain. They took him out of the Ecuadorian embassy where he'd been living all that time. And they put him in solitary confinement. And people were calling on Trump to pardon him. There's so many questions here now that ends up into another theory or a conspiracy. Did they have to get Trump out of the way? Well, let's continue and let's see them intertwine a lot of these together. Go on. Yeah, there's our boy. Like I said, that cartoon. When I seen that, I downloaded that
Do
instantly.
you have his phone number at that point? How do you end it? How do you end the conversation?
We're gonna see each other at the next ski chalet sale.
Okay.
That's where we met. We met at the sales, and he met me at the sale the second year. We went out and had beers, and that's where we're going to meet again.
About that first meeting and Larry McDonald, and you hear him talking about BCCI and these interesting things. So I'm just going to re-ask that. So forgive me for doing this. But Marty, can you remember that first encounter with Casolaro?
I turned to the ski wall, and there was this guy that was about my height, blonde hair, outspoken talking to another person about that bank.
Mhm.
And that immediately drew me to him. And I kind of just hung off to the side of his shoulder. And when he got done, I just said, I can't help but overhear what you were talking about. I work here as a rep, but it's not who I am, but you're talking about my business and I'd love to talk to you. That's how it was started.
Interesting. Asking about BCCI, and that perked up your ears a little bit.
Yep. And frankly, I didn't ever get back to that. Until we got to dinner.
Mhm.
Right about the time that the whole BCCI story had broken in the news. Right about
Same
that
period, yeah.
Yeah.
Marty, do you remember him making any predictions about
Oh.
this is going to blow things sky high or anything like that?
Oh, he was adamant that this was something very, very big and had a lot of big names and a lot of big business involved.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, he said he was saying that this was going to take him to a different level.
Did he ever mention any government officials' names?
Other than Hamilton, that's the only official he said, because that's
What did he say about Hamilton?
he said.
I assume you're talking about Bill Hamilton.
Bill Hamilton. He said that these are the people that actually started the software program.
Right.
When Promise went in my ear, I wanted to know more about it, and that's what he said.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Military, anything about the military or anything about intelligence services like the NSA?
Well, when he mentioned Bill, he said Bill used to work for these guys, or
right.
he worked for him. That's it. But no military ever got involved.
Did the name Wackenhut come up?
No, but that name did come up after the fact for me, because I went to work for DHS back in 2002, and Wackenhut was the name that I kind of ran into.
Oh yeah. That's one heck of a job, I can imagine. You want to spin around now and talk about how the crypto part of that caught your attention?
Well, the crypto part catches my attention, Dan. The reason why is that we know that shortly after 9/11, the West German BND, the German intelligence service, got rid of all of their promised software. Now, why they chose to wait that long and choose a post 9/11 date for it, but here's what I'm thinking. As I mentioned to you before we started the recording, it looks to me, Daniel and Marty, as if the Promise software, which is a multilingual computer software, in other words, it can read in other computer languages and tabulate and assemble databases regardless of what the language that the database is written in. Okay, it's an immensely sophisticated program, especially for back then.
Yes.
So what that tells me is if we're, and let's remember that the recent case, I think it was 2005 or 2006, they arrested that Chinese spy in Arizona for trying to steal secrets from Sandia Laboratories. Well, the guy went on to admit that he had been using the Promise software to do all of this.
Oh, right.
So here, that tells me that you're dealing with a software that's spread all over the world. It's in use in all of these classified installations, and it's gone through several iterations. And if it allows you to pull databases from a variety of languages. It's also the perfect software to use in banks and for things like algorithmic trading. And here comes the big one. It's a perfect software to use in cryptocurrencies
Oh, yeah.
and run mining operations.
That makes
With
so
me?
much sense.
Yeah. Now,
That would be the modern 2022 iteration of this.
that would be the 2022 iteration of a software program that's been out there since the late 1970s, early 1980s. So, in other words, the problem here is that what I'm seeing is we know the Casolaro story. Casolaro basically uncovered along, and Michael Riconosciuto, you know, God bless him, gave his affidavits as part of the court record that yes, he was part of a team hired by the CIA through the Wackenhut Corporation to go in and add backdoors to this software.
Right.
And the software, in turn, was seeded by the Reagan administration, and in some cases, they allowed the Soviets to steal copies of it.
Right.
You know, so that they can shut down the Soviet Union at the press of a button.
Right.
They do all of this, but unfortunately, they go on to learn that before it ever gets into their hands, before they steal it from Inslaw, somebody, unbeknownst to Inslaw itself, has put in a back door.
That's it. Yeah. This
Now,
is the key point.
To me, that's the key point.
And what I get from Marty, from your recollection of meeting Casolaro, is he has that same wondering about this, like, why are they freaking out to this level?
Yeah.
And Riconosciuto provided that to the House Intelligence Committee.
He certainly did.
Yeah, and shortly after that, he got arrested for running a meth lab. He gets stuck in prison for 17 years.
Oh,
they let him out.
imagine that.
Guess what?
And by the way, Riconosciuto's the guy that helps work on things like fuel air bombs and adapting nuclear triggers for nuclear weapons to the use of fuel air bombs. And it's Michael Riconosciuto, by the way, that Ted Gunderson interviews after the Oklahoma City bombing, and it's Riconosciuto that says, no, that's a fuel air bomb.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Marty, I'm just going to take you back.
Yeah, so what did Casolaro uncover? Did he just run into this? He was involved with this programming stuff, but I mean, you even realize how big it was? He said it was big, but how big was it? Could have been that just the way the DOJ was freaking out that got him even more interested. And interesting enough, now we know that Marty went to work for the DHS in 2002. Gee, that's after 9/11. It's dug into crypto. Has to do with big names and big business. Hamilton started the program, the Hamilton Corporation. We'll have more of that in this last shot that we're going to give you. CIA's Wackenhut, the CIA looked at Wackenhut Corporation, put backdoors in. Germany got rid of all the software after 9/11. What did Germany know? And they're not talking about universal software so everybody could use it. Chinese spy was using Promise to steal secrets back in 2005, 2006. And I think Joseph Farrell nailed it. Like I said, he's well-bred and well-studied in all this. It's perfect for running mining operations and cryptocurrency. Wow, so what is this crypto thing going on? I mean, it was tested. They used it to take down the Soviet Union. The information was provided to the Judiciary Committee. And imagine how they felt when they were putting in backdoors and they found somebody else had already put in backdoors to their backdoors. This is the ultimate burn. And what's even more is how Joseph Farrell ended that about Reconnaissance, about the Oklahoma City bombing with air bombs. I mean, that was a big mess. The Oklahoma City bombing, I saw live feeds and was watching it. And they said there's a couple of bombs. And then there was a third bomb and a fourth bomb. And this was live feeds from Oklahoma City. That day, I was sitting in front of the TV watching it. So I know I didn't imagine any of it. And then all of a sudden, that gets covered up. We all know about John Doe 2, who just happened to disappear, and there was no John Doe 2. So you got a big W2TF on that one. But the backdoor to backdoors, what a burn. What a burn for the government and how it all relates to things today. But let's finish up with a bang here with the death and cover-up of Colasaro and more. Roll this.
Back to the time period one last time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's after you hear the news that Casolaro is dead, and they're saying it's suicide, and you're thinking back to the conversations and these chance meetings with him. What are you hearing, and what are you feeling at that point?
I'm immediately red pilled. Okay, I'm immediately that red pilled me for life. That whole thing. I was going down rabbit holes before that, just in college, but they weren't big. There was, Mina and that kind of stuff. I knew he didn't commit suicide. I knew that something fishy had gone on.
I mean, that big accordion file that you saw him carrying, it's never been confirmed. It's gone. Yeah.
And he's reputed to have carried that with him everywhere.
Everywhere.
Do you guys know that the Freedom of Information Act has been applied to the Martinsburg Police Department every single year, over and over again, probably 3 or 4 times a year, for the information on this case.
Uh-huh.
And it is yet to be released.
I can believe it.
It's unbelievable. They skipped the autopsy and buried the body without the family's permission. I mean, they had it cremated.
One of the detectives on the case was the chief of police, ended up as being the chief of police of Martinsburg for a while.
Uh-huh.
No fix
Wow.
in there.
And I believe that the medical examiner was no other than, what was his name again? I can't think of it.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Bodden.
Yeah.
Right.
Dr. Michael Bodden, who became very famous after all that.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. This guy goes all the way back to the House assassination committees in the 70s.
Right.
And he's like, oh, no, the magic bullet's the real thing. And this guy. And then he gets his own HBO special. How do you like that? That's pretty good. Joseph, if you play ball with the establishment, not bad, huh?
And if it's not making sense to Casolaro, then there's an aspect of the story that Casolaro himself, who uncovered all these details, there's an aspect in all these details not making sense to him. And the only thing that I can think of is, maybe the backdoor was added, the original one, long before the Department of Justice stole it. And if that's the case, somebody has everybody over a pickle barrel.
Exactly.
And it ain't the U.S. government, folks.
Right. It's this extra.
It's whoever it is.
Whoever it is.
Yeah.
Well, this, I get the impression Hamilton, when I've read Hamilton's statements about this, he is also a little bit bewildered by the extent to which he's prosecuted for trying to sue the government, after all, for stealing his software.
For stealing his software, right.
Absolutely. And Elliot Richardson.
I know.
is in the middle.
General.
Yeah.
But he's also Hamilton's lawyer.
Right. Exactly. And this is fascinating because he's involved in the Special Intel Committee looking into this. Mm-hmm. And what he says is if I get this right, makes Watergate look like a walk in the park. And of course, he was the attorney general who resigned under Watergate. He would know. That's a huge statement on the record by a very hefty government official.
Yeah.
So he was convinced just by what he saw in the committee. So he's convinced. Hamilton also, as I've said in his public statements, didn't realize, what he was getting himself into dealing with this. But it seems to me they all had a question mark. Casolaro, Richardson, and Hamilton was right at the heart of it. They're wondering. And him reaching out to you and what you found there in that novel about the idea that somebody had placed a backdoor in it before it had been stolen, it explains a lot and would answer a lot of those questions. And that's why it rang a bell for him.
Right. Now let's go further. Let's talk about some other software.
Right.
Let's talk about Hamilton Securities and Catherine Austin Fitts.
Right.
And her place-based software that she developed for Hamilton Securities. Would that kind of software be of interest to the government? Yes.
Yeah.
Would you attempt, if you were the government, to put a backdoor in said software? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Who's the judge that handled her case? Why, it was Judge Nicholas Bua.
Oh, the same judge.
The same judge
Yeah.
that handled the Promise case.
That is unbelievable.
Appointed by Barr.
Appointed by Barr.
Appointed by Barr. Imagine that. It's all appointed by Barr. So everything they just said, they just opened up cans of worms in so many different directions. Let's just look at it. Is it all a conspiracy theory? Casolaro, did he really commit suicide? Come on, let's accept some reality here, not just call these things theories. So the files are all gone. The Freedom of Information Act has been filed every year trying to look into his death. And the kicker here, the same medical examiner who examined it all was the JFK magic bullet guy. Anybody still believes the magic bullet guy? I mean, there's really not much hope. So the other aspect here is the government who stole the software. Someone else added a back door. Wow, before they even stole it. Was it planned? This Hamilton Securities people are involved, the judges. Someone has the world over a barrel. I like the way Joseph Farrell put that. And the reason why this is so important to end tonight's show with was just the way it's all unfolding. I mean, then you even had Elliot Richardson, former AG under Nixon, said this would make Watergate look like a walk in the park. The Hamilton case with Catherine Austin Fitts, that's another situation in itself. But the biggest thing is how they ended it was, it's the same judge who was appointed by Barr, appointed by William Barr. Now we have a few other questions here. Is why did Trump have to go? No matter what, the risks were involved. And the way they got rid of Trump kind of exposed a lot of cover-ups that would expose the swamp to the American people and the world. I mean, if you watch the Trump impeachment trials, here's what caught my attention was I was watching the people testify, watching their body language. And all these ambassadors, when they were testifying, you could tell who was really nervous and who was really afraid that they would say the wrong thing. It seemed to be all these ambassadors to these foreign countries and the EU. They seemed to have a nervousness about them. I think it was Sunderland, he played it off like it was kind of like he was confident and tried to come across as a good guy sometimes. But they have all one thing in common. They're all either CIA or controlled or compromised by the CIA. With all these back doors, there's so much information on all of them. God, if they ever moved the wrong way, almost sounds like communist China. And where they're going to control everybody in their citizenry. So, with that being said, the reason why this is very important at this time is because we have all these accusations flying around the world. Everybody's pointing fingers at each other. Countries are willing to use nuclear weapons to go to war. And that's been kind of really hesitant since the fall of the Soviet Union. You don't really hear people talking about nuking. So what is in the background? Those are the questions. Those are the questions we need to be asking right now before we get into nuclear wars, and it's too late. Are they willing to cover up their crimes? We've said this before. Is how far will they go to cover up everything? Because all the stuff here that they're talking about, they're not theories, they're actual conspiracy. So we need to look into it. We need to be asking questions. We need to pay attention because there's a lot coming after this. And what we're seeing take place isn't what our founders designed. I think it was it John Adams, the Secretary of State, said something, we're getting entangled in foreign affairs and conflicts. Oh, we seem to be in the middle of them all. That being said, good night. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show.